There's a lot of formulaic responses these days to architecture. Keep on redefining what our playpen is, what our sandbox size is, and it keeps to be getting smaller and eroded. I went to school for 5 years, and then it took me 5 years to forget everything I learned. The projects that we do for entrepreneurial clients, right? And in order to break out of the norm, you need entrepreneurs. The pure design, as we're taught in school, is a very small fraction of the work that goes into any building. We never got into architecture to get a job. Some people call it passion. For me, it is sort of it's almost like solving a puzzle. The way you have to think, couldn't get in, so we jumped the fence. That experience in itself was surreal. Like, the beautiful thing that I find empowering and encouraging and inspiring is the fact that you started generally with nothing. From that sort of a courtyard or cloister experience, we walked through a different archway, and in the fog sits left to right. Depends on where you catch me. I would say absolutely not and absolutely yes. It is constant change of pace, constant change of scale. It doesn't really matter what the brief is. And of course it does. It doesn't really matter what the client wants. Of course it does, right? The best idea wins. The good architecture is not about solutions. It's about defining the problems. You might like that. I might like this. Who wins, right? No idea. I'm not even sure I'm interesting. So therefore, no.
Welcome to this exhibition, Out of Context. It's a show that brings here to WAF Miami 2025 7 different projects by 7 architects from 7 different countries. It's called Out of Context because everybody is focused on their particular projects. All of these projects are very specific, very local. They are not unified by any particular theme. I want to trace the origins of ideas. This is what kind of my mission is. I keep asking all kinds of architects from around the world what are their inspirations, what drives them, what makes their architecture unique. And this is kind of out of context because now there is a particular view of architecture. We're all trying to do good kind of architecture. We know how to do it. There is almost a recipe now. It has to be, adaptive reuse. We have to use very ecological materials. We're kind of asking all the same questions. We try to integrate architecture with the land, the landscape, nature. There is a very small but repetitive kind of list of what is the most important thing. But I want to break all of that. If we know that concrete is not exactly ecological material, but it doesn't mean, in my opinion, that you shouldn't just use it. There are ways to reinvent it. Obviously, timber is very important, but if the building is not made out of timber, it doesn't mean it's not a good building. So I want architects to keep looking into very different directions and be inspired by very different ideas. Mm-hmm. So welcome to this exhibition. Let's start with, if you could introduce yourself, who you are, where you're from, what kind of work do you do, and what is your focus, in the profession?
Right. So my name is Sasa Radulovic. I am a founding principal of 5468796 Architecture. We are based in Winnipeg, although we do projects all across Canada. As that's our grazing ground or context, if you wish. Being in Winnipeg is quite interesting from the perspective of context, right? Because it is, while it's central, it's very close to the geographic center of North America. It's very far away from everywhere, right? So it's about 8-hour drive from Minneapolis, which is the closest big city, right? And 14-hour drive to Calgary, which is the closest big city in Canada. So as such, Winnipeg has to produce its own context to make the projects define that or respond to it and define that context. So the exhibit is interesting. The issues that you're trying to tackle are interesting, and you're right. There's a lot of formulaic responses these days to architecture, so we keep on redefining what our playpen is, what our sandbox size is, and it keeps to be getting smaller and eroded, right? So whenever we work outside of Winnipeg, there's an onslaught of different consultants that come in to do their parts of the work. Yet they take no liability for that. So my big pet peeve is the envelope consultants, right? They're there to raise every potential issue and therefore generally water down the building to its bare minimum, because their experience is limited with everything that's innovative. In Winnipeg, we don't have envelope consultants, right? So architects do that job, which is generally part of our practice. And so I agree with you about standardization of practice across the world, the size of the or the bounds of the field that are now feel much more constrained than we used to be. But at least for us, it does not feel that way, right? Part of the reason is because the projects that we do for entrepreneurial clients, right? And in order to break out of the norm, you need entrepreneurs. A lot of our work is in housing, and in housing for private clients, where we're finding there's a far less red tape. We're finding clients who are actually somewhat adventurous and interested to go for a ride, right? And once they do, then we together aim to design and create something that kind of breaks out of the norm, which is generally what keeps architects excited, right? And what keeps architecture exciting, because as we all know, the pure design as we're taught in school, is a very small fraction of the work that goes into any building, right? And so how do you make 5% of the project that's generally fun actually carry the same energy throughout the project, right? And therefore it has to be challenging, and not tough challenging, but challenging mind-wise, research-wise, knowledge-wise. People are generally yearning for knowledge. Young architects want to learn more. So by opening things that are non-standard, you kind of, by opening that sandbox that you're talking about, in which we kind of feel like boxed in, we expand and we try to create opportunities for all of us to learn, take some risks along the way, right? And then we'll see how that all performs.
I know you participated in WAF's program last year. You got a prize.
It's our 11th.
Oh, this is 11. So you participated many times.
many
What
years, yeah.
brings you, to WAF? You keep participating in WAF's program. Why do you think this is different from other programs around the world? What makes this forum special?
Well, part of it is collecting intelligence, right? We rarely get to see our other architects present, right? We see people talk about their projects in lectures and so on, but rarely do we see in-depth expose of a project that's sort of questioned in real time by real-time jurors, other architects mostly, and you get to see the depth that you otherwise, unless you're really studying a project in depth, you don't get, right? And none of us has time to spend hours on a project, since there's so much good architecture out there. So here you get to see the craft of presentation. You get to see the craft of spoken word when it comes to architecture. Learn that, and and how architects position themselves in the world context, in the context of their continent, if you wish, the climatic context, and so on. And it's remarkably repetitive to some extent every year, because we seem to be obviously preaching to the choir on one side, but seem to be all grappling with the same issues, right? Environment, zoning, traffic, like they're all the same to different extents, right? But they're all the same. So a lot of lessons learned in the WAF are actually applicable across the board, across the globe. So it is that combination of that sort of window into practice that we generally don't have, and then the other one is, of course, meeting people in the field, sharing stories, and then ultimately the speakers, right?
What kind of projects did you bring this time? How many projects did you already present today?
Yeah, we did present. We presented one. We were selected by Jeremy Melvin and Paul Finch as winners of WAF X for some technological innovations.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We're presenting 2 projects this year. We generally submit a couple projects for WAF. Last year it was a project called Pump House in creative reuse category, and a private house in the urban villa category, and we were lucky enough to win both of those, which was a nice boost to our Legos. Yeah, the biggest one I have to say was though in 2014, so going 10 years ago in Singapore. It was one of the first early Singapore sessions where we ended up winning the Future Project of the Year in Singapore. So we still have pictures of in that pool that's suspended up in the sky in the
By
Sotheby's
Moshe
Hotel.
Safdie,
Yeah.
yes.
We have pictures of us the next morning, completely hungover and everything, with two W's, right? One for the category, one for the actual future project of the year. They don't float. They're plastic, full plexiglass, so they don't float. But that still brings shivers through my spine, because it was. You get to also measure, which is the last part that I didn't mention in your last question. You get to measure or gauge, if you wish, how your work compares, stands, how your ideas, how your thoughts about what architecture should do for people stands in the world, right? Of architecture and design, because there's some magnificent work happening in the world. The other part of the entire problem is, as we are seeing, or the conversation, as we are seeing a tremendous amount of projects online shown through the web and other social media, and they're very good. However, they're always curated by the designers, right? So they know what to show, what to hide, and so on and so on, right? So there's very little written word, if you wish, there about the projects that you can take for granted by critics and so on. Very few magazines remaining in the industry. And so coming here, because of the live jury and the presenter interaction, you actually get to hear and see and dig deeper and get a better understanding of those projects. They're not, just pulling wool over your eyes. So that's critical.
I want to ask you a very unexpected question. What kind of architecture brings you joy?
Smart. Smart. I like, not smart as a solution, but one that requires thinking. If it doesn't require thinking, if we're just calling it in, then it's like any other job, right? And we never got into architecture to get a job. I don't know anybody who has actually stayed in architecture because all they ever wanted was a job, right? And so it is, some people call it passion. For me, it is sort of it's almost like solving a puzzle every day, right? And that puzzle can be anything from a political stream that you're fighting, right, to the smallest detail that somebody doesn't want to build or want to change, and so on. So it is constant change of pace, constant change of scale, constant change of the way you have to think, right? And decisions you have to make, and so on. I didn't respond to your last question, to your last question properly. So this year we're presenting another creative reuse project, which we did yesterday. But what we are very excited about is we're presenting another project that's a future project. So it's supposed to break ground next year, but it's trying to disrupt the entire mass timber industry. And
Oh,
to me,
wow.
that's something that we've discovered through a series of events. Some of them having to do with the context of us being located in a city or in the market, if you wish, that is isolated. Circling back to our first few words of this conversation. And in an isolated market like Winnipeg, if we want to use mass timber, which has become a global commodity, we have to pay global prices for that, right? Well, our market can't afford that. And so, but people want to see how you build mass timber. So you can either build it by heavily subsidizing project, which by the way is still the nature of the mass timber industry in North America, or you can try to figure out how could you do that in isolated markets like Winnipeg. So that, to our context, we have to go back to immigration, which is curious. Immigration has brought a lot of immigrants from Ukraine, and not only now, but in the past,
Historically,
Germany historically, and from that part of Europe. And so most of them know how to build stick frame, which is basically using small pieces of wood to build houses and then put them, stucco them, and that's what it is. So trying to see how can we use basically a wood stud that you can pick up at your local hardware store to build mass timber buildings, to unlock the opportunities there are, because the industry is advancing, saying, okay, we can build mass timber buildings higher, bigger, and all of that, but we are at the mercy of the global markets as a commodity and of the manufacturers. They're very few and far in between in North America.
You travel around the world, I'm sure, a lot. I wonder if you could go back to some of the most memorable examples of visits in architecture that is very striking, very unforgettable. You said smart, but I also want to know what really is, maybe you remember as very emotional, not only necessarily smart, but, it just brings joy and certain feelings to what you see, what you experience, and something that something transformative that is absolutely unforgettable.
Sorry, there are many, so it's tough to like the two, and these are expected answers, so I apologize for that. But maybe I feel like many architects have given the same answers. There are two projects in France by Le Corbusier, right? One of them being the Ronchamp Chapelle, and then the other one being the convent, La Tourette. And I've been to both a few times, and they have two different stories that I want to tell. The last time we went to the Ronchamp, it was just as Renzo Piano has completed the visitor center and so on. So prior to that, we went there, parked in the gravel parking lot, walked by the tiny little booth, got a ticket, and you went in. It was marvelous. We were the only people there. Now there's a whole visitor center, that you're facing. You have to go through all that. And it was the early days of the visitors. It just opened that week, right? So we got there with a bunch of people. I was happy to show them a bunch of non-architects wanting to tour them through. And we get there, the gates are closed. The people working there, they're still working through the kinks. They don't know what to do with us. Were we late? I can't remember if we're late, we're not. But anyway, we couldn't get in, so we jumped the fence, basically, because it was closed. They didn't know how to not let us in, right? So we jumped the fence and went in, and so we were alone again, like trampling across the grounds and looking at the project sound. So I was able to talk to the architects about the building itself, and the reverie we as architects have towards the site and so on might have stopped architects, but hasn't stopped that group, right? So nobody. There's no police involved, right? If you did it today, probably there would be, and so on. So that experience in itself was surreal again, because we were there, nobody else was there, right? And we were able kind of to break through the barrier that this new renovation was. The other thing about La Tourette, a completely different visit. I was there with my wife. We drove a whole day from Milan looking for it. It was dusk. We finally found it. Both of us. We were in a different place called La Tourette, because this is the early days of driving maps in the car. So they took us to a city called La Tourette as opposed to the place where we were going. So anyway, so we need to pee. Both of us need to pee. We went to the wrong city. We're like, oh, it's not there, but it's like 3 kilometers away. So great, get back in the car, go. So we're finally going up the hill towards it. We're pretty sure it's there, right? But we don't know because we already made the wrong turn once. So we get to this old convent. It's basically a big courtyard building, park. We don't see any signs of it. There's a big archway we go through, and then we see 2 bathrooms, 2 public washrooms of the courtyard in the old building. So we've both run into one into each, and close the door, and I just hear her screaming. They're kind of open ceilings, bathrooms, so you can. And she sat on the toilet, and on the door was the drawing of the La Tourette. She's like, "We're here," right? And so from that sort of a courtyard, a cloister experience, we walk through a different archway, and in the fog sits La Tourette,
Wow.
right? And so it was. I don't think it has anything to do with us needing to use the bathroom, but it had to do with actually a very heightened experience of discovering it finally and arriving at a very, like a seeping rain, foggy, dusk environment, right? And again, there was nobody on site. They were preparing for renovation, so there was some fencing starting to emerge around the building, and so we basically just again toured through the site for a couple hours in the rain and fog, right? And so I think it's a combination of the event, if you wish, the people you're with, and exceptional architecture that brings those things.
And also, seeing it, kind of discovering it in a way unexpectedly.
Yeah.
You didn't really know how to find it, and then you discovered it.
And you own those moments, right? There's stories that you can
Yeah,
tie to.
yeah.
It's not just a building.
Would you say architecture is art? How would you respond to that question?
Oh, I would respond. Depends on where you catch me. I would say absolutely not and absolutely yes, right? And it depends on
So let's start with absolutely yes. Why is
You know,
that?
going back to the art of puzzle, right? So the puzzle making, as you're resolving this puzzle in front of your eyes, the beautiful thing that I find empowering and encouraging and inspiring is the fact that you started generally with nothing, right? If you're not renovating a project, that's basically a site. You might know something about it, you might not know anything about it.
Maybe
You
there is
start
no
somewhere.
site at all. It's
That's right.
just the
That's right.
project itself.
And so every decision that you make, from the material used, right, the configuration of the building, to how people are gonna perceive it, how they're gonna arrive at it, makes a difference. And so it's a really large, complex set of decisions that one has to make, and the teams make it, right. It's not just one person, but to me, it's actually art. But the art part of it is reconciling it all together, right? And you occasionally get it, right? It's not nobody's game forever, right? Nobody wins all the time. And then the on the opposite side, similarly, it's not art because it's quite technical, right? But if you can try if you can find both, if you can figure out a way to coalesce the two, then it's both, right? And that's the best architecture there is.
So, when you start working on a project, where do you start? Where do you look for inspirations? How do you make the first move? What inspires you? What do you bring to the project? Is it really about the brief and what the client wants, or do you start somewhere else? Is it about the site, or you bring your own ideas to the site?
It's a team effort. That's an important thing to it's architecture is both a team sport and the contact sport, right? And the and so you have to find your way through the battle, if you wish, or through love, right? That the process is, and the none of us finds it uh, individually. We find, at least in our experience, we find it together, right? And so, and we don't know. Every project is different, right? But if you have multiple minds working towards a understanding what the project is, then I want to backtrack from here, because I think the good architecture is not about solutions. It's about defining the problems that you're trying to tackle, right? So, and that you can do only by employing multiple minds, right? Because everybody comes from different angles. Everybody has a different view of what the problems could be. Once you go through what they could be and once you define what they are, it doesn't really matter what the brief is. It doesn't, and of course it does. It doesn't really matter what the client wants. Of course it does, right? But if you can develop a complex and coherent enough set of things that you want to tackle through the project, then you go about going about that, right? And you can solve them through art, technology, design, whatever you want to call it. But if you don't know what they are, you're basically shooting in the dark. You know, you might like that, I might like this. Who wins, right? Whoever signs the check, I guess, wins. And that is a lousy way of building buildings, lousy way of.
You just talked about the team and teamwork, but I understand that you are the leader in your
There's three partners in
firm.
the firm. There's multiple associates.
But
There's
who is
two
the leader?
principals.
Do you start, as far as the design,
Right.
do you put your first sketch on the paper?
I would say I facilitate. We try to stay off paper for as
Off
long as we
paper.
can.
So
Yeah,
you
yeah. It's facilitating.
discussing
Yeah, yeah.
different ideas.
So the best idea wins, right? That's the important thing. It's not that everybody's ideas needs to be in and compromised. It's not even the best idea. It's defining the issues that you want to address that
Okay.
wins, right? And once these are strong enough, then a project's robust. The story has developed. The story has something to be rooted in or anchored. If you don't have that, it's my decision versus yours. That's all there is, and we all have different thoughts about what something should look like, right? Like if I were to draw a sketch, as you're insinuating, right? I would consider it the biggest success if the final product, the further the final project is from that sketch, the better it is, which
Okay,
means we
okay.
interrogated it, right?
So
If
a trigger to go into a particular direction doesn't mean it
but
will
we try
end
not
up
to do it because we want to stay
being
away
any-
from the preconceived
yeah.
response. We can do it. We can all do it. We can all, somebody comes with a project, we can, if we need to do a presentation in 2 hours, we'll do a presentation in 2 hours, right? But that means we have not turned a single stone. That means we have not thought about it enough at all.
Do you have a recipe for how to be an interesting architect?
No idea. No idea. I'm not even sure I'm interesting. So therefore, no.
I want to maybe give some advices, a couple of advices to a young architect. What would you recommend?
I think this became clear when we started our firm and we started hiring younger architects. And you have, as an older architect, you have a tremendous power over a young mind that has just gone through years of dreaming about being an architect, years of dreaming about doing things in real life, changing people's lives through the work you do, and so on. However, when they arrive to your office or to your studio, you have a full power over where they take everything they've learned to, right? And the hardest thing to sort of want young architects to have is resilience. You want them to hear you, but not to be swayed by what you have to say. And we, as experienced architects, we have the mandate not to make them jaded, right? Not to have them take on your own baggage and sort of struggle with it themselves, right? They have to develop their own, and they have to stay in their own. So the other, so that's important. The other thing that's very important is to spend the time learning. My dad was an architect. He said, like, I went to school for 5 years, and then it took me 5 years to forget everything I learned in order to be able to be a practicing architect. I wouldn't agree with him, but there's a lot of humor in that. But what I would say is you need to stay open. Like, it's hard to, in North America, it takes 7 to 10 years to become an architect through school, and then you still have to do the internship, to get registered. So it's a 15-year slug. And so and how do you stay fresh through that, right? And so you have to stay unjaded and willing to learn, and use those lessons to formulate your own questions, right? Do not use them to take them as like something that's carved in stone, and then go with it and make a career out of it, right? It is about you framing your own career from that. So stay open-minded for as long as you possibly can.
Okay,
Everything else is gonna go work against you on that trail.
great. Thank you so much
Thank you
for
so
all
much,
your
Vladimir.
wisdom.
Yeah.